Greetings. Welcome back to English 102 for South Seattle Community College. This is Dr. McCarthy. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the academic paper. How exciting is that topic, huh? Now, I know that sometimes students feel a little frustrated about writing an academic paper because the paper itself has such a strict form and a strict format that it can feel like your freedom of writing is taken away from you. But I want you to remember that writing an academic paper, whether you are writing a research paper or an argumentative paper, that this is the process of storytelling. It's the same kind of process as storytelling in many ways that a piece of fiction would offer. But instead of using fictional characters and poetic language, we are just trying to present the story more factual and more specifically. In a sense, though, we are telling a story. We're telling a story about the argument that we have chosen to present to our reader. And with that said, let me give you a couple pointers and ideas of the different elements that you should think of when you're writing an academic paper and how you can approach it. The first thing I want to encourage you is to approach an academic paper by starting first with research questions rather than a thesis statement. Now, this might feel a little counterintuitive, but bear with me here. Research questions allow us to research a topic completely without having any major preconceived notions about how that topic should be presented. When we start with a thesis statement first, rather than our research questions, what we end up doing is trying to impose our will upon the topic. However, a really good paper doesn't impose somebody's will. Rather, it presents evidence in order to support a particular point of view. So we want to start with the research questions and allow our research to eventually lead us to a good working thesis statement. Now, a working thesis statement simply means that the thesis statement can be changed throughout the process. And if you're anything like me, when you have written a paper, you have noticed that as you go through the process of writing, sometimes your thesis statement actually changes. And that's okay. The more we write about a topic, the more we explore and research it, the more we refine our ideas about the argument we mean to make. And of course, that will change our thesis statement. Now, what are the elements that should be in an academic paper? Well, let's break them down for a moment, shall we? First, of course, you have the introduction, and then you have several body paragraphs, and finally you have the conclusion. This is simple enough, and I am sure that when you were, at least in high school, you were taught the 5-paragraph essay. By the time, of course, you get into English 102, you're looking at a lot more paragraphs than 5. And indeed, there is almost never a set amount of paragraphs, but rather a set amount of pages that you have to work within. So I want you to not think about the 5-paragraph essay so much. I would want you to consider how many arguments that you need to have within your paper in order to prove your thesis statement, and allow presenting those arguments to determine how many body paragraphs you have in a paper. It's never a good idea, especially at this point in time in your academic writing career, to set a number of paragraphs. I hope this makes sense. Regardless, let's look at each little area of the different parts of the paper, the anatomy of a paper, and what might work well in those areas. Let me start with the introduction. In the introduction, you have several different elements that you want to include. The first element is your hook. The hook is a lot like a movie preview. You know, you go into a movie to watch something that you've been looking forward to, and before that movie starts, you're given all these previews. Well, the previews are there in order to hook you as an audience member into really wanting to see that movie when it comes out. The same kind of thing happens with a hook within an academic paper. You're trying to find a way to engage your reader so that he or she will want to read all of your paper. A hook should be an illustration or a small story that offers an example of your argument or your thesis statement. Try to avoid using questions as your hook, and try to avoid telling your reader why he or she should be interested in your topic. Rather, show them. For example, let's pretend that my thesis statement was that chocolate ice cream was better than strawberry ice cream. Rather than telling my reader this is so, I want to show it to them. Maybe I describe a scene where a couple is on a date, and at the end of the date they go in for a bowl of ice cream. One of the date members chooses chocolate ice cream, the other chose strawberry. But throughout the entire time of the meal, the person with the strawberry ice cream looked longingly at the dish of chocolate ice cream, wishing that she had made the better choice. Somehow, what you want to basically do is just illustrate your point. You have finished with your hook and your audience is interested, then you need to add some framing information. Framing information is the background information, brief but to the point, which your reader may need in order to better understand your thesis statement. For example, if you were writing a piece about a certain time in history, you may have to give a background framing information about what was going on in history at that point in time so that your reader has a better understanding of what your paper will explore ultimately. After you've given your framing information, then you offer your reader your research questions. Let your reader know what questions you were investigating, the questions that eventually, and the investigation that eventually led to your thesis statement. After you have given your research questions, then go ahead and lay out your thesis statement. Now, I have a different recording on what a thesis statement is, but let's look at it very briefly. A thesis statement, or at least a successful one, will tell your reader not only what your paper is going to be about, what your argument is, but also why. It's important to explain the why. For example, I just say that chocolate ice cream is better than strawberry ice cream. You, as the reader, can say, so what? Why is it important? Well, I need to address that why, so that's why I need it as part of the thesis statement. After you have presented your thesis statement, in your introduction, I always suggest that you offer a short presentation or discussion about how your paper is going to be organized. What does this mean? Well, you can tell your reader that you're going to prove your thesis statement that chocolate is better than strawberry ice cream by first looking at the history of chocolate versus strawberry ice cream. Next, this paper will examine the ingredients that go into chocolate versus strawberry ice cream. And finally, this paper will present a study in which participants were asked to say what their favorite ice cream was. By offering your reader information about how you are going to organize your paper, you will better be able to lead them into the process of reading your paper. The next part of the paper is the body of the paper. In the body of paper, this is where you present the different pieces of evidence in which you are going to use to prove your thesis statement. Now, evidence can be many different things, and sometimes you'll hear the word data being used. But evidence and data basically describes facts, pieces of information, accepted theories, different things in which you could put out there in order to support your thesis statement. When you bring up these different pieces of data, it is important to build a bridge between the data and your thesis statement. Basically, you need to tell your reader why the data that you have selected to discuss actually supports your thesis statement. If you don't make this connection, then you allow your reader to make assumptions about the connection, and oftentimes your reader may make the wrong assumptions. So it is important for you to specifically build this bridge yourself and allow your reader to see the connection. Now, the next thing you need to include in the body of your paper, and with each major point, is whether or not there are any opposing views. Students often want to avoid this part, but it's important not to avoid it. Remember, a good researcher will look at all different sides of an argument. And I say all different sides because there's often more than just two sides of an argument. Examine these many different sides and also take the time to say why the opposing argument is no longer important or why it's something that we should consider later on. After you have offered all your data and evidence throughout the body of your paper, then you want to come to the conclusion. I often find that students have a difficult time writing a conclusion of the paper because they don't necessarily know what to say. I suggest with the conclusion that you start off by reminding your reader about your thesis statement and why that thesis statement was important. Next, spend a little bit of time refreshing your reader's memory about the different ways in which you have proved your thesis statement to be correct. And finally, take a little bit of time to explain the different areas of research that still might be conducted regarding this particular topic. It is always a good idea to suggest different avenues or thoughts regarding the topic and different ways in which it could be studied later on. And those basically are all the elements within an academic paper. I would like to finish off this podcast by giving one last piece of advice, and that is the art of definition. Heard from a past professor that your writing is overly generalized, that you need to become more specific with your writing. And what they are suggesting is that you are not being very specific with things such as definition, things such as words and names. You'll say, for example, they all feel this way, instead of telling us, the reader, who they are. The important thing about academic writing is that you're always being very specific. You're always explaining yourself very clearly, and you are specifically defining every major term that you bring up. Again, the trick is not to allow your reader to make assumptions about your meaning. You are trying to lead your reader to the particular meaning in which you are presenting. So when you work on the editing of your paper, make sure that you stop at every term, at every generalized use of the word they or them or it, and ask yourself, how can I make this expression specific? How can I make it so it is direct? If you can accomplish these things, you will write a very wicked academic paper. Thank you very much for joining me this afternoon, and I look forward to talking to you and answering any follow-up questions you may have. Goodbye.